Good evening. Tonight, gunmen storm Nuhu Bamali Polytechnic Zaria, kidnap 3, including 2 children. We cannot afford sinful silence, oppression and injustice against the Nigerian youth. Pastor Tunde Bakare's message to the country's leaders in the aftermath of the NSAS protest. A cry for help from displaced persons in Oguta and Ohaji Egbema communities of Imo State. They want government to tackle flooding in their area. And conceding defeat seems still a bit difficult for US President Donald Trump as he acknowledges Biden won the election but said it was rigged. It's not been a pleasant day for workers of the Nuhu Bamali Polytechnic Zaria in Kaduna State as gunmen suspected to be kidnappers today stormed the institution's staff quarters, abducting head of engineering department and 2 children. The gunmen also shot at another staff of the Polytechnic while he was trying to escape being abducted. The incident is coming barely a week after the school resumed academic activities following a long break as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. The spokesman of the Kaduna State Police Command, Mr. Mohammed Jalije, told Channels Television that the gunmen invaded the Polytechnic at about 10 p.m. last night and headed straight for the staff quarters where they abducted the 3 persons and shot 1. He says security operatives have launched a manhunt for the kidnappers with a view to rescuing the victims and arresting the criminals. The security concern in neighbouring Katsina State is also a cause for concern that perhaps explains why Governor Aminu Masari is extending a hand of partnership to the Air Force to tackle the menace of banditry and other related crimes affecting the state. He is proposing the setting up of an Air Force landing site in Funtua local government area of the state, with hopes that it will help improve the response time to distress calls regarding the movements of bandits in the northwest region. Our next report looks at efforts to contain activities of bandits and other criminals in the state.
Recovery of weapons, drugs and cash by the police in Katsina State. One of the northwest states steadily hit by bandits, rustlers and kidnappers. On this day, 2 bandits were killed while a kidnapped victim was rescued. Since the massacre of 47 villagers in 3 local government areas of the state in April, which sparked a series of killings in 2020, it's been a back and forth between security forces and those carrying out these dastardly acts.
Troops of Operation Sahel Sanity in Shimfida village of Jibia local government area of Katsina State neutralized 17 armed bandits. During the operation, troops recovered 5 AK-47 rifles and 152 rounds of 7.62 special ammunition. On a sad note, we lost 3 of our troops.
That's on the side of the media. On the side of the government.
Security summits like this one have been organized to investigate ways to tackle the problem.
Whoever is familiar with happenings in Katsina State from last year to date is quite aware that our main major problem facing Katsina State is security.
Everybody is a stakeholder in the security of the state. We should come together as a whole, as one. The security agencies should see themselves as one also.
The state government has also thrown its weight behind the activities of the Air Force with this piece of land for its activities.
Once there is a complaint or there is an information of movement of bandits around this area, it is easier for the Nigerian Air Force to respond from here than from Katsina.
From the air or land, the security forces have been mandated with an objective, which is to protect lives of Nigerians from those bent on causing grievous harm.
Meanwhile, the chairman of the Senate Committee on the Army, Senator Ali Ndume, believes the fight against insurgency in the northeast has been largely successful compared to the situation of things in the region 5 years ago. The lawmaker, who is clamoring for more funds for the military, believes the focus of the leadership is getting the people displaced in the region back to their homes. Senator Ndume was our guest on our political program, Sunday Politics.
You can't say the security situation in the country, especially in the Northeast, in 2015, where over 22 local governments was taken over by insurgents. But as it is now, you can't say there is a particular local government that is under the control of the insurgents. But we wanted to get those people back to their local government. That is the challenge. Most of the local government now, because people are scared, their properties have been destroyed. About $99.2 billion destruction have been inflicted on Borno alone. So getting people back on their feet is what the government is doing. And as you said, we don't even have the number. And when you don't have the number, and also you don't have the necessary equipment and arms to, carry out this responsibility, then it's as good as you don't have anything. In a country of over 200 million or thereabout, and with a budget of 13 trillion, and you are budgeting 27 billion, a paltry 27 billion for the Nigerian army in a period of war, that does not show seriousness in any way.
Still on security matters, 877 indigents of Edo State, comprising 672 males and 205 females, have completed their training and graduated as special constables to work in concert with the local police authority to effectively police their area of responsibility. The governor of Edo State, while addressing the new special constables at the passing out parade in Benin City, the state capital, assured them that the state government would provide free health insurance and life insurance for them.
Weeks of training have led to the acquisition of some of the skills being showcased here at the parade ground of the Nigerian Police Training School, Ogida, Benin City, the Edo State capital.
It is quest to see Edo free of criminality.
877 men and women drawn from the 18 local government areas of the state went through weeks of training from 9th October to qualify as special constables under the community policing arrangement and are to be deployed to their communities to work with the local police authorities.
You have been taught on how to make lawful arrests. You have equally been taught rudiments or elements of human rights. You are to have very healthy and robust respect for the rights of the citizens. You have equally been taught on how to do your community policing that is intelligence-led. You do more of intelligence gathering. You are an integral part of the policing system in Nigeria. You are not in any way inferior to any law enforcement agency.
The governor of Edo State, Mr. Obaseki, is here to congratulate them on their progress. He underlines the importance of community policing and assures them of the government's support.
The state government will be is interested in your affairs, will be interested in your developments. And one way we will show this is to provide free health insurance to all of you. We will also provide life insurance for each and every one of you.
Governor Obaseki also assigns the special constables a task he considers important.
So your first assignment will be to join us and the other federal government security agencies to go into the various communities and arrest all those inmates who broke from our jails. We will give all the support so that before Christmas, each and every one of them would have been picked up and sent back to where they escaped from.
Concerning the security challenges in Benin City in recent times, the State Police Command notes that the raising of some police stations had led to deployment constraints. However, it maintains that with the alternative locations being provided by the state government, police visibility on the streets would increase from the new week. Jessica Olubuse, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, 463 special constables have also graduated in Niger State to help tackle incessant cases of banditry in troubled communities. The graduates are part of the first batch of the Inspector General of Police's special constabulary scheme aimed at enhancing community policing. At the graduation ceremony held at the police training school in Minna, the Niger State Deputy Governor says the state government is optimistic of a reduction in crime in the state. Meanwhile, police authorities in Lagos have relaunched its anti-crime strategies to curb crime and criminality across the state, with the arrest of 720 suspects in a simultaneous raid on areas believed to be harboring criminals and hoodlums across the state. The state police authorities said in a statement that the suspects were alleged to be in possession of various weapons and substances, which includes locally made guns, cartridges, charms, and substances suspected to be Indian hemp and cocaine. The statement adds that some items suspected to have been looted from various shopping outlets within the state during the recent NSARS violence were also found with suspects. The Commissioner of Police in the state, Mr. Hakeem Odumosu, had earlier warned and directed police officers and men to move against lawlessness and criminality in the state. More reactions have continued to trail the recent freezing of bank accounts of some NSARS protesters. The latest comment coming from the serving overseer of the Citadel Global Community Church, Pastor Tunde Bakare, who says it is sinful to keep silence when the youth of the nation are being oppressed by a Nigerian state that is supposed to protect them. He also commented on the debate over the social media regulation bill. Our correspondent Olu Phillips tells us more.
Twice in the space of 1 month, Pastor Tunde Bakare is voicing out in very specific terms issues around the nation that constitute great concern to him. It's a regular service at the new auditorium, but with a special time dedicated to addressing the nation. He starts very unequivocally, and this is about the Nigerian youth and situations with national and sub-national governments post-NSARS protests.
Some of the actions recently taken by the government on the heels of the NSARS protests may need to be reversed sooner rather than later in our collective best interest so that they do not trigger further protests. Among such policy actions is the freezing of the accounts of young Nigerians who reportedly sponsored the protests, to extend the olive branch to the youth in one breath, and to deprive the youth of the right to freedom of movement and property, as enshrined in our Constitution in another breath. We send confusing signals to them and cast doubts in their minds regarding the sincerity of the government.
Then to the elephant in the room, social media. To be or not to be, he bears his mind.
I would like to state at this juncture that there is a ninth power block that must not be taken for granted either. It is the Nigerian youth with the power of social media. Any politician, any leader, any governor or president, any political group that takes the social media serving Nigerian youth for granted does so at his own risk or peril. This is why I strongly advise the power blocks, including the Southwest governors who are calling for stricter regulation of social media, to desist from doing so.
Not only should they be allowed the responsible use of platforms available, as national builders, Pastor Bakare says government at all levels must acknowledge that suffocating the spirit, creativity and liberty of Nigerian youth is both counterintuitive and counterproductive. Olu Phillips, Channels Television News.
In part two, after the break, we'll look at the recent changes in the price of petrol and the fear of more hardship for Nigerians. The Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives, Mr. Bismarck Rawani, speaks on this, while our data analyst, Babajido Gusawo, shares some statistics on the issue. Please join us again. Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Gunmen storm Nuhu Bamali Polytechnic Zaria, kidnap 3, including 2 children. We cannot afford sinful silence, oppression and injustice against the Nigerian youth. That's Pastor Bakare's message to the country's leaders in the aftermath of the NSAS protests. A cry for help from displaced persons in Oguta and Ohaji Egbema communities of Imo State as they want government to tackle flooding in their area. And conceding defeat seems still a bit difficult for US President Donald Trump as he acknowledges Biden won the election but said it was rigged. Now, more explanations are being made over the reasons for the recent hike in the pump price of petrol. Mr. Bismarck Rawani, an economist and member of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, says the fate of the price is largely dependent on market forces. Mr. Rawani is, however, asking for a judicious use of the monies initially used to pay for subsidies.
There's been a deregulation of the price of petroleum, and there's a price modulation formula, PPRA format. So if the price of crude oil increases, then the price of pump price of petrol will also increase. If it reduces, the pump price of petrol should actually decline. As far as I know, in the month of October, the price of crude actually came down. It was trading at about $38, $36. So just anecdotally speaking, and I don't have the data, the price of petroleum, refined price of petroleum products should actually be declining. However, there are other things that go into that template, other things like the exchange rate, things like availability of foreign exchange and all of that. So it's a public document, and they make it open to everybody. So transparently, there's no question about the fact that the unions and members of the PPRA include unions, youths, and all of that. So clearly, they must have gone through this before they determine the price. What the Economic Advisory Council advised was the deregulation of the price so that it's controlled by market forces, and that the question is, and then because there's no subsidy, what does the government do with the freed funds that they would have used otherwise for subsidies?
With those viewpoints from Mr. Rawani, the question is, will the law of gravity apply to the price of petrol? We have joining us Babajido Gusawo, data and information consultant, to share insights on the significance of the new petrol price. Thank you for joining us on the News at 10.
Good evening, Millicent.
All right. This is the second adjustment we're seeing, and this is to the retail price of petrol in 3 months. Many wonder the future of the price of petrol in Nigeria.
So there are 3 ways I would like to talk about it before we talk about the future. The first is to share the good and the bad news. The second will be to talk about the future. And the third will be the most important, the implications. So the first, the good and the bad news. Now there's some good news. The good news is petrol is no longer scarce. That is the good news. The bad news, Millicent, is that Aliko Dangote will buy petrol for the same price as Surah the tailor. In other words, affordable petrol is now scarce. Now let's look at the outlook. And for us to really look at the outlook, it's not to consider the price today, it's to look at what has happened since independence, what is happening today, and what is likely to happen in the next 10 years. So let's take a look at the chart of the week, because the chart of the week allows us to really put this petrol price in perspective. And we focus on that. The first decade after independence, petrol was sold at 6 kobo per litre. A decade after, 15 kobo. As at 1990, 60 kobo. A decade after, 22 naira. 2010, 65 naira. And now we're looking at 170 naira. Everyone that stares at this graph in front of you makes it easy for you to project what is likely to be the price of petrol in another 10 years. So if this trend continues, you should not be surprised if in 2030, the price of petrol is sold at 350 or 400 naira. Because the trends are shown that in the last 6 decades, since independence, every decade, we've seen a rise in the price of petrol. So talking about the law of gravity, the law of gravity is likely not going to apply to price of petrol within the next 10 years if these trends do continue. But again, let's stick to the facts. Should President Buhari be blamed for this? The evidence shows that we've had these challenges since the last half century, since the end of the Civil War in 1970. And between 1970 and today, we've had 11 pilots, 11 national presidents or civilian presidents that have led this country. So the challenge shows that we've seen this as a historic price problem which has affected income inequality. But what it has also shown is that we need to look at how do we ensure that we reduce income inequality, which the price of petrol is causing.
I'll come to that, especially, families affording this. But then is there any evidence that prices will drop with a lot of maybe private refineries coming up on stream?
And so there's a lot of fake news and myths about private refineries. The question, for instance, is if you take the engine out of a Ferrari and you put it into a Volkswagen Beetle, will it make the Volkswagen move as fast as a Ferrari? Let's really understand what is going on. Yes, Mr. Irwani is right. Market forces are playing out. But let's also be specific and look at how has the economy of Nigeria performed in the last half a century. Again, what the evidence shows is that in the last half a century, post-Civil War, the economy has remained unstable. And because, Millicent, the economy has remained unstable, the economy has remained uncertain. And because the economy has remained uncertain, there has been underdevelopment. Let's take a look at the dollar exchange rate and how it affects the price of petrol, even though crude oil prices affects the price of petrol. And here's what you'll notice. Just as we've seen that curve, that petrol price curve, we've also seen that same petrol, the dollar exchange rate has been unstable. And don't forget, crude oil price is in dollars. In 2000, with as little as 4,000 naira, you'll be able to get $40. Now, for you to get $40, you need at least 18,000 naira. So let's understand that the instability of our exchange rate is playing a big role. And so when market forces see the price of the dollar today, and they also make their forecast on what the price of the dollar will be in future, combined with other domestic costs, transportation, risks, storage, and of course, corruption, then those are the factors that affect the price of petrol. And yes, people say the domestic refineries, the large domestic refineries could assist. But the evidence shows that these large domestic refineries will buy crude oil in dollars. So as long as the dollar remains unstable, even though global crude oil prices do not significantly change, then it is likely we see a further rise in petrol prices. The summary is, the large implication is, since May 1999, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Since May 1999 to date, the cost of food, which is the most important thing to families, the evidence from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that between this period and the Fourth Republic, the cost of food, Millicent, has risen by 250%. In summary, what it means is that in Nigeria, it is getting cheaper to die than to live. And that is what every elected official needs to focus on. The solution is, how can you fast-track prosperity for every household in Nigeria?
So exactly, looking at more than half of families living below the poverty line. So how would they afford petrol? And this is maybe stability, price stability, and then affordability.
Yeah, so like we started, petrol is no longer scarce, but affordable petrol is scarce. Aliko pays for the same price of petrol as Sura the tailor. And so petrol is not just a cost to families. Petrol really is a prosperity tax. And so what we've seen is, if it continues, we'll see rising income inequality. And the evidence from research shows that whenever nations see rising income inequality, crime will rise, underdevelopment will rise, and national stability will fall. So every elected leader needs to understand that petrol price goes beyond just that price of petrol. It affects different sectors of the economy, and every elected official needs to understand that in Nigeria today, it is getting cheaper to die than to live.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Babaji Dogusowo. Always a pleasure having you on the analysis. Thank you. Well, the news at 10 returns. A cry for help from displaced persons in Oguta and Ohaji Egbema communities of Imo State. They want government to tackle flooding in their area. Please join us again. As residents of Karo local government area of Nasarawa State continue to battle with water scarcity, the UN Habitat is concerned about how the communities are fighting the coronavirus and catering for their hygiene. The program has selected 6 of these communities for its COVID-19 response and recovery strategy in Africa to help curb the spread of the virus. Our correspondent Halima Gayam reports.
The city shares a common border with Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Its population has over the years grown above its capacity as many people working in Abuja reside here. More dire among its many challenges is the absence of pipe-borne water since its creation in 1991. Residents of surrounding communities feel the consequences more as they depend on wells, streams and commercial sources which are considered unsafe.
Some of these individuals that they dug their borehole, we do go to purchase their 5 naira or 10 naira per jerrycan.
Relief may have come their way as the UN Habitat selected 6 of these communities for its COVID-19 response and recovery strategy in Africa.
Most of those communities don't have access to safe drinking water. And the target for the UN Habitat is not just to provide hand washing stations, it's to also provide safe drinking water. Now, for us as a local government and in those communities, it will also help us reduce pressure on primary healthcare centers.
As sole beneficiaries of such gesture in Nigeria, they reveal what it means to them.
When the issue of that intervention came to us, we were so happy because we don't have the water, and then we don't have the way that we find the water easily. That's why we decided to give the far side of the marks to use this borehole for the benefiting of the people that are, the community that are still here.
A recent intervention by the UN Habitat by coming down to our community to give us a way out and a very good helping hand. It is not a small measure, but a very big tremendous effort.
Incidentally, Karo local government area, according to the state COVID-19 task force, has the highest number of confirmed cases of the virus in the state. The intervention is to help the selected communities fight the coronavirus and improve their hygiene. But for them, it will be beneficial even after the pandemic, as it will complement the efforts of authorities in tackling the decade-long water challenge. Halima Gayam, Channels Television News.
All laboratories across tertiary hospitals in the country will receive an upgrade so they can conduct molecular tests not just for COVID-19 but other diseases. This formed part of discussions at the flag-off of a two-day training for medical professionals in Lagos State. The event had in attendance the Governor of Lagos State, the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the Minister of State for Health. Governor Sanwo-Olu says although surveillance is important, the state remains committed to carrying out tests. On his part, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, says the House is committed to increasing allocation to the health sector with a view to improving the well-being of Nigerians.
The House of Representatives has committed to increasing the appropriation due to the health sector so that we can remedy the weaknesses of infrastructure and capacity, access and quality that bedevil our national health care system. The program that we have come to launch here today is part of efforts to ensure that healthcare professionals have the skills they need to continue to do the incredible work they have done so far. It is also an example of what we can do when we work together across different levels of government and with the private sector to deliver objectives that serve the best interests of all our citizens.
I want to challenge and say to all the participants that take these next 2 days as a very important assignment where, the discourse that will be coming out of it is not only for you. You must indeed turn yourself to train the trainers, and you must be able to domesticate and pass on the skills, the interaction, the conversations that will be coming out from it, so that indeed other health practitioners, some of the other colleagues that are not in this room will become the real beneficiaries of an exercise like this.
Activities marking the inauguration of the Edo State Governor, Mr. Godwin Obaseki, for a second term in office climaxed today with a Thanksgiving service at the new Festival Hall of the Government House in Benin City. Although it was a day of singing and dancing in praise to God, the event was also another opportunity for Governor Obaseki to restate his commitment to the service of the people.
A congregation thankful for the successful inauguration of Godwin Obaseki and his deputy Philip Shaibu display their gratitude to God in this hall in Benin City, the Edo State capital. The homily dwells on the enormous love God has shown Edo State, the need for the government to always remember they were elected to serve all Edo people, and strengthening of the security arrangements in the state.
God's grace upon all of us has made it possible for Edo State to go through what was initially predicted to be a violent election. It is God's grace that has protected us from experiencing what some pollsters and experts in election matters had declared was going to be a bloodbath in Edo State. We must all keep it in mind that your primary obligation is to the people of Edo State. It is pertinent to note that all the political parties ought to have the primary interest of the people. Therefore, loyalty to political party is to be pursued only to the extent to which it benefits the entire people who have employed you.
Governor Godwin Obaseki, who thanked all who contributed to the peaceful September 19 election, assures the congregation and people of Edo of government's commitment to transforming the state and keeping it secure.
Our victory is a victory for Edo people. We've never seen Edo come together as they did during our elections. Edo is Edo. My role in the next 4 years is to help us discover what makes Edo Edo.
The mood again shifts to Thanksgiving. The service also featured prayers from the governor, the deputy governor, their family, and the state, and the launch of the Edo anthem.
From Edo, we move to Imo State, where some level of respite seems to have come for displaced victims of flooding that occurred last month in two coastal communities of Imo State, following the recent gesture by the state government to provide relief materials for them in order to reduce their suffering. The displaced persons say the flood menace has become a yearly occurrence due to their proximity to the Oguta Lake, which shares boundary with the River Niger.
All producing local government areas of Oguta and Oaji Egbema are the two coastal communities in Imo State. Quite a number of its communities and farmlands have proximity to the Oguta Lake and Orashi River, which are tributaries of the River Niger. But anytime it rains heavily, the river overflows its bank, causing houses and farmlands to be submerged and hundreds of families displaced. At the request of the state government, affected victims are here at the Oguta Civic Center. Representing the state governor, Hope Uzodinma, the government delegation led by the managing director of the Imo State Oil Producing Development Commission, ISOPADEC, Charles Orie, is available to assess the situation and distribute these relief materials to the victims to mitigate the effect of the incident.
Whatever is your pain is our pain. I'm from here. So we are here today to tell you people that we are with you. I will take your messages back to my boss, the governor of Imo State. I will tell him your pain. If you go to Abuja and beg ecological department of the government to solve this problem, I don't want us to be coming here every year to count your losses together.
The displaced victims made their feelings known to the government, saying they want the authorities involved to ensure these relief materials get to the right beneficiaries and not hijacked.
It's a welcome development if it will not be hijacked by the powers that be, because very often when these relief materials are sent, they don't get down to the people concerned. As soon after the ceremony, you may hear it that the thing doesn't get down to the people affected.
Problem is how they will share it, because the previous ones they have been bringing, we don't even get it. I didn't mean that it is cassava stems they ask us to come and collect it. I won't see anybody here. All of them will run away. But they have bring a lot of things, like these foams and the other things. The former one they brought last year, we didn't get anything. And we are suffering so much. Even mosquito and the other things, we need some mosquito nets and other things to help us.
Even though flooding is a natural disaster, residents who witness such a situation in this area say if the government can dredge the Oguta Lake, it will reduce the perennial flooding there to a large extent. But for now, the people must keep hope alive till it's resolved. Eyitope Kute, Channels Television News.
The federal government says at least 150,000 poor rural women in the country will be supported with 20,000 naira grant each under the Conditional Cash Transfer Program. The Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, Mrs. Sadiya Farouk, made this known during the disbursement of the funds to beneficiaries in Bauchi State. Over 1,000 women in the state are expected to receive this grant, but 200 in Bauchi local government area have already received their monies in the first phase of the program. Our correspondent Hajira Aliyu has more.
Cash in hand, 20,000 naira each for these women to enhance their socio-economic life. The Ministers of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development and the Women Affairs are both in Bauchi to present the grants to the beneficiaries. It's a conditional cash transfer program designed to provide safety nets for some of the poorest and most vulnerable women in rural Nigeria.
We identified those doing petty, the informal sector, those doing petty trading, widows, the vulnerable, and we identified the small-scale businesses they are doing. And it is based on that these women were identified to be given this.
So when you empower women, it's like you empower the entire nation. And by empowering the women, she will use this empowerment to take care of her children, especially the widows.
The FGIS program is coming at a time when the latest statistics on poverty by the National Bureau of Statistics reveals that more than 82 million Nigerians live in poverty and 52% of the poor people live in the rural areas.
Our appeal is that they should judiciously utilize these funds in the area of enhancing their businesses. If they don't have, they should start a business that will multiply this money for them, and very soon they will be able to even support other people.
Some of these women already have ideas of a possible turnover.
I will use this money to put in my other business so that I can make it from 20,000 to even more than millions, because it's a season of business, because people are seriously in need.
The success of the program may be determined by the next poverty indices. Hajira Aliyu, Channels Television News.
Still ahead on the news at 10, conceding defeat seems still a bit difficult for US President Donald Trump as he acknowledges Mr. Biden won the election but said it was rigged. We have that and more when we return. The Tertiary Education Tax Fund, TET Fund, says it is targeting 500 billion naira as education tax for the year 2021. This is with the view to enabling TET Fund increase its interventions in tertiary institutions across the country. TET Fund Board of Trustees Chairman says they have spent about 7 billion naira to put in place 7 academic press centers, with one in each of the 6 geopolitical zones and the Federal Capital Territory.
One of the core mandates of a Tertiary Education Tax Fund, TET Fund, is to rehabilitate and restore tertiary institutions in the country. As part of its responsibilities of disbursing and monitoring its projects across the country, TET Fund is in Yola, the Adamawa State capital, on a consultative visit to interact with faculty, university management and students. Gathered here at the Senate building of the Modibo Adama University of Technology are heads of tertiary institutions of universities, polytechnics, federal and state colleges of education, representing over 40 institutions in the Northeast. They are here for an interactive session with management of TET Fund, led by the chairman of its board of trustees.
Being members of the Northeast, we all know of our individual challenges in our local environments. The whole Northeast has become what is called, the vacuum environment. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
For the last few years that the Adamawa State government decided to ensure that the university is back on its feet, it's something that if it is purely left to the state government, like I just said, but for TET Fund, we are being called a university because infrastructurally, we can also be called a university.
The Vice Chancellor, Nigerian Army University BU, Borno State, reiterates that TET Fund is an intervention organization and appeals for more government funding of education.
We reckon TET Fund to be an intervention agency and not a direct budget line item for higher institutions. But as it is now, basically, institutions are reliant on TET Fund for everything under the sun.
The high point of the visit is inspection tour of a newly constructed academic printing center and other TET Fund interventions in the Modibo Adama University of Technology, Yola.
We've gone around and we've seen, and everywhere that we've visited, we are encouraged by the fact that the vice chancellors, the rectors, the provosts, they keep repeating the same, but for TET Fund, but for TET Fund, but for it actually gladdens my heart that we are doing something right.
Over time, indigenous academic texts have been produced outside Nigeria. However, with the establishment of the 7 academy press centers across the country, this trend would hopefully end and give rise to the publication of more academic books in the country.
A World Bank federal government support program multi-sectoral crisis recovery project says it will construct a 40-kilometer tarred road in Yobe state to improve critical service delivery in the northeast region. The MCRP coordinator of the state, Mr. Edi Jidawa, disclosed this at the signing of 6.3 billion naira contract for the rehabilitation and construction of Gujba Mutai Road and handing over of renovated structures burnt down by Boko Haram insurgents in the state.
Gujbai Mutai Road is one of the economic roads in Yobe State, which links 3 states of Borno, Gombe and Bauchi. It was, however, taken over by Boko Haram insurgents between 2012 and 2016. The road, which was initially constructed in 2003, became the main route of the insurgents and was also washed away by erosion, causing damages. The World Bank federal government support program, named the Multi-Sectoral Crisis Recovery Project, has signed a contract to rehabilitate the road for easy access and transportation of agricultural produce in the surrounding communities.
As part of the recovery and settlement of the people living around the road, they need to reconstruct the road to allow the easy movement of farm produce to major markets located at Damaturu, Bunyadi, Ngalda, Gombe State, and southern part of the country as an alternative road to improve their economic well-being. Today, I think it's a very good historic day, whereby if this contract we sign, we're about to sign, and it's signed, and I believe it's going to turn the entire lives of the people of the region, the local government, the state, and even beyond.
Under the program, some office complexes raised by the insurgents in the state capital were renovated and handed over.
Actually, we appreciated their efforts. It was an old building that has been dormant for some time, and the renovation is good, and we're happy that they specifically chose the Ministry of Works and awarded the project to us. We are happy because we have agency, that is the Road Maintenance Agency for Yobe State, which is sitting idle without an office. We will not have a problem in maintaining that project because we are looking for a place to put up the agency.
With the assurances of the contractor to mobilize the site in a few weeks, it is anticipated that the road, when completed, will reduce the hardship of movement of persons and goods in the area.
Outside Nigeria, it's about 2 weeks after the U.S. presidential election, but many intrigues come therefrom. The latest now is that President Donald Trump is acknowledging for the first time that his opponent, Joe Biden, won the election. But in a quick twist, President Trump alleges again that the election was rigged. In a Twitter message, Mr. Trump said about Mr. Biden, he won because the election was rigged. However, about an hour after that tweet, Mr. Trump says he will not concede defeat. He's yet to provide evidence to back his allegation of fraud. Peru's interim president, Manuel Merino, has resigned a day after 2 people died during protests against his government. The former Speaker of Congress had been in the post less than a week, replacing President Martin Vizcarra after he was impeached on Monday over bribery allegations, which he denies. Senior politicians had called for Mr. Merino's resignation after a violent crackdown on demonstrations against him. Now, 12 ministers from his recently appointed cabinet resigned earlier on Sunday in protest against police brutality and his handling of the crisis. Tens of thousands of demonstrators, many of them young, have been taking part in protests against Mr. Vizcarra's removal in recent days. While Europe is grappling with a surge in cases, over 26,000 tests positive in Britain. Russia has reported over 22,000 new cases, and police is patrolling Rome to ensure compliance. French police are tightening checks as the lockdown enters the 3rd week. Here's more on the global update.
One of the creators of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine says the impact of a new COVID vaccine will kick in significantly over summer.
We get a high vaccination rate until or before autumn, winter next year.
Although the vaccine has given a boost of confidence that an end to the pandemic is close, the vaccine needs approval from regulators, and they will only grant that if they are happy the jab is safe and works well. Over 26,000 people in Britain have tested positive for COVID-19, bringing the total number of coronavirus cases in the country to 1,344,356. The data shows the coronavirus-related deaths in Britain rose by 462 to 51,766. Russia hit a new record daily high when the nation confirmed 22,702 cases in the past 24 hours, taking its total to more than 1.9 million. To ensure crowds are observing social distancing in Italy, police in Rome were deployed around the city's busy areas to make sure residents are adhering to restrictions aimed at slowing the surge of the virus. Access to popular Via del Corso and Spanish Steps was limited as police stood around watching the size of the crowd. And France is entering its third week of lockdown, and the police is ramping up lockdown checks all over Paris, conducting traffic checks to see if motorists had the required permission slip attesting they are out for essential trips, such as visiting a vulnerable relative, food shopping, seeking medical care, or exercising.
Some sports stories now. Mercedes F1 driver Lewis Hamilton has won the 2020 world title and equaled Michael Schumacher's record of 7 F1 crowns. A poorly timed pit stop from Stroll saw Sergio Perez, who started from pole position, lose control of the race, with Hamilton passing Perez to take the lead after 20 laps. From that point on, Hamilton builds an unassailable advantage, running his intermediate tyres down to slicks to take him to the end of the race and officially move him on to 7 world championships. World number 3 Dominic Thiem saw off Stefanos Tsitsipas in the 3 sets at the ATP Finals to avenge his defeat in last year's final. The Austrian came through 7-6, 4-6, 6-3 in the Pete Sampras group. The third seed was pegged back in the second set by Tsitsipas, but raced into a 3-love lead in the decider. And after winning a mammoth deuce to earn a 4-1 lead, the 27-year-old stayed resolute and served to get his bid in London off to the ideal start. And the main news again. Gunmen suspected to be kidnappers today stormed the Nuhu Bamali Polytechnic in Zaria, Kaduna State, kidnapped 3 persons, including 2 children. 1 other staff of the institution was also shot. Also today, the overseer of the Citadel Global Church, Pastor Bakare, told Nigerian leaders that they cannot afford sinful silence, oppression and injustice against the Nigerian youth in the aftermath of the EndSARS protests. That's the news at 10 to 9. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Have a good night.